The carriage wheels crunch over gravel, signaling the end of a 3-year lie. Society called it a sensible match, a quiet duke, a practical bride. No fireworks, just the steady, reassuring warmth of a hearth fire. But hearths grow cold when a spark from the past catches the drapes. She wore lavender, laughed like breaking glass, and carried a ghost's name. In one heartbeat, a comfortable marriage shattered, revealing the hollow space where a husband's heart should have been. Breakfast with Lucian was an exercise in precision. Every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, he would walk into the morning room of our London townhouse, his cravat tied in a modest, unostentatious knot. He would nod to me, a small, polite inclination of his dark head, and take his seat at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. The footman would pour his coffee. I would pour my tea. He would open the Times. The room would settle into a heavy, companionable silence, broken only by the scrape of silver against porcelain and the rustle of broadsheet paper. It was not the stuff of romantic poetry. Lord Byron would have clawed his own eyes out of sheer boredom. But for 3 years, I had cherished that silence. I had believed it was the sound of safety. I was 26 when Lucian Pendleton, the Duke of Westford, asked for my hand. By the standards of the ton, I was firmly on the shelf. A vicar's daughter with a respectable dowry from a late aunt, but lacking the title or the blinding beauty required to snag a peer of the realm. I had sharp collarbones, an overly serious mouth, and dark hair that refused to hold a fashionable curl. Yet, Lucian had chosen me. "I require a wife, Miss Beatrice," he had said, standing stiffly in my father's parlor, the rain lashing against the leaded windows. He didn't look at my face. He looked at his gloves. "Someone sensible. Someone who does not require endless entertainments or dramatics. I can offer you comfort, respect, and the protection of my name." It was a transaction. I knew that. But over the next 36 months, I fell in love with my husband. It was a quiet, creeping sort of love. The kind that builds in the mundane spaces of a shared life. I loved the way his brow furrowed when he was balancing the estate ledgers. I loved the scent of cedar and cold air that clung to his greatcoat when he returned from Parliament. I even loved his peculiar, exacting habits. Lucian had opinions on how I presented myself. At the time, I thought it was an aristocrat's demanding nature. He preferred me in pale, watery colors, lavenders, soft grays, and a very specific shade of French blue. He abhorred my habit of wearing my hair severely pinned, insisting instead that I leave soft tendrils framing my face. "It softens you, Beatrice," he would murmur, his long fingers grazing my cheek before a dinner party. The touch was always brief, fleeting, but it was enough to make my pulse jump, enough to feed the foolish fluttering hope in my chest that the transaction was evolving into a genuine attachment. He bought me gardenia perfume. He bought me a silver comb for my hair. He asked me to learn a specific, melancholic Chopin nocturne on the pianoforte. And he would sit in the armchair by the fire, his eyes closed, listening to me play it over and over. "You play it beautifully," he said one evening, his voice rougher than usual. "I prefer something with a bit more tempo," I confessed, flexing my aching fingers. "Perhaps some Mozart?" "No." His eyes snapped open. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a shuttered, icy distance. "Just the Chopin, Beatrice. Please." "Oh." I played the Chopin. I wore the French blue. I dabbed the gardenia perfume on my wrists. I molded myself into the Duchess of Westford, smoothing down my own rough edges to fit the exact contours of the space he had carved out for me. I thought I was becoming his ideal woman. I did not realize I was merely putting on a dead woman's clothes. Not dead, precisely. Just dead to him. Her name was Genevieve. I only knew the bare bones of the scandal. 5 years before Lucian married me, he had been engaged to Lady Genevieve, an earl's penniless daughter. 3 weeks before the wedding, she vanished to the continent with a wealthy, aging Austrian count. The gossip sheets had a field day. Lucian retreated to his country estate in Somerset for 2 years, and when he emerged, he was the cold, untouchable Duke of Westford. Society agreed he was better off without the fickle creature. I agreed too whenever the dowagers whispered about it over card games. Lucian had survived the humiliation. He had moved on. He had married me. I looked at him across the breakfast table that Tuesday morning in May. The sunlight caught the silver at his temples. He turned a page of the newspaper, took a sip of his coffee, and set the cup down in the exact center of the saucer. "The Duke of Devonshire is hosting a ball on Thursday," he remarked, not looking up. "We should attend. It would be poor form to decline." "Of course," I said, buttering my toast. "I shall wear the new blue silk." Lucian finally looked up. His eyes, a pale, clear gray, softened slightly. "Yes, the blue silk. You look very well in that color, Beatrice." I smiled, a warm flush rising in my chest. It was a comfortable illusion, and it had exactly 48 hours left to live. The Devonshire ball was a stifling crush of bodies, expensive perfume, and desperate ambition. Hundreds of beeswax candles burned in the grand chandeliers, dripping hot wax onto the polished floorboards and raising the temperature in the ballroom to a suffocating degree. I stood near the terrace doors, attempting to catch a stray breeze, my hand resting lightly on Lucian's forearm. The French blue silk rustled against my petticoats. The gardenia perfume bloomed heavily in the heat. Lucian was engaged in a dry conversation with Lord Hetherington regarding grain tariffs. I was half listening, letting my gaze wander over the swirling sea of dancers. We were a portrait of marital stability, the solid, unshakable Westfords. Then, a ripple moved through the room. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a physical shift in the atmosphere. The music, a lively country dance, faltered for a fraction of a second as the lead violinist missed a cue. The chatter nearest the grand staircase suddenly dropped an octave, turning from boisterous laughter into frantic, urgent murmurs. I turned my head. Standing at the top of the stairs, framed by the arched entryway, was a woman. She was tiny, bird-boned and delicate, with skin the color of fresh cream and hair a bright burnished gold. She wore mourning clothes, but it was not the heavy, dull bombazine of a grieving widow. It was black silk, cut daringly low, hugging her fragile curves and making her look like a pearl set in onyx. I didn't know who she was, but I felt the muscle in Lucienne's forearm lock into solid iron under my fingertips. The low murmurs around us became distinct whispers. "The Countess? Is it really her? The old Count finally died in Vienna, left her nothing, they say." "Genevieve." The name hit my ears just as Lucian stopped speaking mid-sentence. Lord Hetherington stared at him, bewildered. But Lucian didn't see Hetherington. Lucian didn't see the crowded ballroom. Lucian didn't see me. His face drained of all color, leaving his skin a sallow, sickly gray. His jaw slackened. The mask of polite, aristocratic boredom he had worn for 3 years simply fell off, shattering on the floor between us. What was left underneath was a raw, gaping wound. Genevieve descended the stairs. She moved with a liquid grace, her chin tipped up, bravely facing the stares of the society that had condemned her. But her eyes were searching the crowd, searching frantically. And then she found him. Across 30 yards of crowded dance floor, her gaze locked onto Lucian. Her breath hitched. I could see the exact moment it happened. Her lips parted, and a look of profound, agonizing relief washed over her features. "Lucian," she mouthed. I couldn't hear it over the din of the room, but I saw the shape of the word. Beside me, Lucian let out a sound. It was barely a breath, a low, fractured exhale that tore its way out of his throat. It was the most intimate sound I had ever heard him make. It held a decade of grief, anger, and an undying, desperate hunger. He didn't remember to excuse himself. He didn't remember that he was a duke, or that we were in public. He simply stepped forward, dropping my hand as if it were a heavy stone. The physical loss of his touch jolted me. I stood there, rooted to the spot in my French blue silk, watching my husband carve a path through the crowd toward another woman. He stopped 2 feet away from her. The dancers parted around them like a river flowing past a rock. She looked up at him, tears welling in her large violet eyes. "I came back," I heard her say, her voice a reedy, trembling whisper that carried over the sudden hush of the onlookers. "I'm sorry, Lucian. I came back." Lucian stood frozen, his large hands flexed at his sides, curling into fists and releasing, as if fighting the physical urge to drag her into his arms. His chest heaved. He looked entirely undone. "Genevieve," he said, and his voice cracked. I watched them from the shadows of the terrace doors. I looked at the golden tendrils of hair framing her porcelain face, the exact style Lucian insisted I wear. I looked at the delicate slope of her shoulders, and then a memory violently shoved its way to the forefront of my mind. We had been married a month. Lucian had taken me to a jeweler in Bond Street. He had picked out a necklace, a heavy sapphire pendant. "It matches your eyes," he had told me. I had been thrilled. I had brown eyes. I had thought he meant the dress I was wearing. But Genevieve's eyes were the color of bruised violets, the color of sapphires. The gardenia perfume I wore suddenly smelled like rotting vegetation. It choked me. The blue silk felt like a shroud. The realization didn't come as a sudden dramatic blow. It seeped into my bones like freezing water. Every preference, every request, every gentle touch and melancholic song. He wasn't molding me into his ideal woman. He was trying to resurrect her. I was not Lucian's wife. I was a sketch, a pale, inadequate understudy playing the lead role until the star felt well enough to return to the stage. And now the curtain was rising and the star was back. I stood utterly alone as my husband looked at the woman who had broken him, his eyes shining with the kind of devastating love he had never once offered me. The carriage ride back to Grosvenor Square was a masterclass in marital torture. The space between us on the leather bench was exactly 3 feet, but it felt like a sprawling, impassable ocean. The street lamps flickered past the carriage windows, throwing harsh, rhythmic shadows across Lucian's face. He was staring out the window, his profile rigid, but the stillness was a lie. His knee bobbed up and down with a manic suppressed energy. His fingers drummed silently against his thigh. He was vibrating. He was alive in a way he had never been in my presence. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, feeling the sharp dig of my wedding band against my knuckle. I waited for him to speak, to explain, to apologize for leaving me stranded by the potted palms for 20 minutes while he escorted the Countess de Rosy to a chair and fetched her lemonade. He said nothing. "She looks well," I said finally. My voice was eerily calm. It shocked me. Inside, my organs felt as though they had been rearranged with a blunt knife, but my vicar's daughter upbringing held my posture perfectly straight. "The Countess." Lucian flinched. The drumming of his fingers stopped. He didn't turn his head to look at me. "She has had a difficult time," he said, his voice clipped, rough. "The Count was unkind." "I see. She is entirely without protection in London. Her father will not receive her." "A tragic circumstance," I offered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Lucian finally turned to me. His eyes were dark, dilated, defensive. "It is merely a matter of common decency, Beatrice. She is an old acquaintance. I could hardly leave her to be devoured by the gossips." "Of course not." I met his gaze, refusing to blink, refusing to let him see the humiliation burning behind my ribs. "You were simply being chivalrous, Your Grace." The formal title struck him like a whip. He blinked, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before the icy, aristocratic mask snapped back into place. He turned back to the window. We did not speak another word for the rest of the journey. The next morning, the unspooling of my reality began in earnest. Usually, we breakfasted together. At 8 o'clock, I walked into the morning room. The footman stood at attention. The Times was folded on the table, but Lucian's chair was empty. "His Grace requested a tray in his study, Your Grace," the footman murmured, avoiding my eyes. The servants always know first. They can smell the shift in a house's foundation before the first crack appears in the plaster. "Thank you, Thomas," I said smoothly. I poured my own tea. I buttered my own toast. I chewed, swallowed, and tasted absolutely nothing. When I finished, I walked down the corridor to Lucien's study. I didn't knock. I opened the door. He wasn't sitting at his desk. He was standing by the fireplace, staring at the flames. In his hand was a small velvet box. He snapped it shut the moment the door clicked, slipping it into his waistcoat pocket with the guilty haste of a pickpocket. "Beatrice," he said, clearing his throat, his posture straightening. "I did not expect you." "Clearly." I stepped into the room, my eyes sweeping over his desk. His ledgers were closed. There was no ink on his fingers. He hadn't been working. "I have an appointment at my club this morning," he said briskly, moving toward the door. He paused as he passed me, offering a tight, forced smile. "I will see you at dinner." He didn't touch my cheek. He didn't linger. He walked out, leaving the scent of cedar and nervous energy in his wake. I stood alone in his study. My eyes drifted to the portrait hanging above the mantelpiece. It was a painting of me, commissioned shortly after our wedding. I walked closer, resting my hands on the cold marble of the fireplace. I stared at the canvas. The artist had complained, I remembered now. He had wanted to paint me in a rich burgundy, a color that suited my dark coloring. Lucian had forbidden it. He had insisted on the pale lavender. He had directed the artist to soften my jawline, to paint my hair down around my shoulders, to capture a sort of fragile, wistful expression that I had never naturally possessed. I wasn't looking at a portrait of Beatrice, Duchess of Westford. I was looking at Genevieve, painted over my face. The physical pain of it hit me then, a sharp, breathless ache right behind my breastbone. I gripped the mantelpiece, bowing my head, dragging oxygen into my lungs. I did not cry. Crying was for women who had lost something that belonged to them. You cannot lose what you never truly had. 3 days later, the ghost came to call. I was in the drawing room, attempting to read a novel, when the butler announced her. "Lady Genevieve, the Countess de Rossi," he intoned. She walked in. In the daylight, she was even more devastatingly beautiful. The grief and exhaustion only added to her ethereal charm. She looked like a bruised angel. She wore a simple walking dress of pale gray, the exact color of a rain cloud. "Your Grace," she said, dipping into a flawless curtsy. I stood up, closing my book. "Countess, to what do I owe the pleasure?" She smiled, a tragic, trembling thing. "I hope I am not intruding. I came to thank the Duke for his kindness at the Devonshire ball, and to introduce myself to you, of course. Lucian has spoken so highly of his practical bride." Practical bride. The words were a polite assassination. "Lucian is out," I lied smoothly. "He was in the stables." "Oh." A shadow of genuine disappointment crossed her face. She looked around the drawing room, her gaze caught on the heavy silver tea service on the sideboard. "He kept it," she whispered. "I beg your pardon?" She walked toward the silver, trailing a gloved hand over the back of a velvet sofa. "The tea service. Lucian and I chose that pattern together, in Bond Street, before I left. I told him the chasing on the handles was too fussy, but he insisted it would look grand in the morning room." She turned to me, her violet eyes wide and painfully innocent. "Does he still like it?" I looked at the silver teapot. I'd poured his tea from it every morning for 3 years. I had thought it was a family heirloom. "He seems quite attached to it," I said, my voice dead flat. Genevieve offered a soft, knowing smile. The smile of a woman who knows her territory is still secure, even if another flag is temporarily flying over the castle. "He is a man of habit," she said softly. "He holds on to things, long after he should let them go." She wasn't talking about the tea service. I looked at her. I saw the golden hair, the pale skin, the sapphire eyes. I looked down at my own French blue silk dress. In that moment, the cynicism I had traded for love 3 years ago returned. It wrapped around my heart, cold and protective and hard as iron. Lucian Pendleton had bought my companionship to ease his pride, and he had dressed me in the ghost of his past to ease his heart. But I was not a doll to be dressed and positioned in the corner of his life. I was flesh and blood, and I was done playing the understudy. The gardenia perfume cost £4 an ounce. It was imported from Grasse, housed in a heavy crystal flacon with a silver stopper, and it smelled exactly like a grave. I stood in my dressing room the morning after Genevieve's visit, staring at the bottle on my vanity. The morning light caught the faceted crystal, throwing rainbows against the flocked wallpaper. I uncorked it. The sweet, heavy scent clawed at my throat. Without a flicker of hesitation, I walked to the wash basin, tipped the bottle over, and watched 4 pounds of French perfume glug down the drain. It pooled for a moment, a pale, oily puddle, before vanishing. I followed it with a pitcher of cold water, scrubbing the porcelain until the basin smelled only of lye and hard soap. Then, I turned to my wardrobe. My maid, a quiet girl named Martha, stood in the corner with a freshly pressed morning gown draped over her arms. It was lavender. "Put it back, Martha," I said. She blinked. "Your Grace?" "Put it back, and the French blue silk, and the dove gray muslin." I walked to the massive oak wardrobe and threw the doors open. A sea of pastel, watery fabrics greeted me, the wardrobe of a ghost. In fact, pack them all into trunks. Take them to the parish charity in St. Giles. I do not care who wears them, so long as it is not me. Martha's mouth opened, but the sharp, flat tone of my voice kept her silent. She scurried forward and began pulling dresses from their hangers. I reached into the very back of the wardrobe, past the rows of Lucian's preferred colors, and pulled out a gown I had brought with me from my father's house 3 years ago. It was a deep, unapologetic crimson. The wool was slightly coarser than my current finery, and the cut was 2 seasons out of date, but it was mine. I had bought it with my own pin money. Lucian had once called it rather severe during our engagement, and I had never worn it again. I put it on. I ordered Martha to pull my hair back into a tight, severe knot at the nape of my neck. No pins, no soft framing tendrils. When I looked in the mirror, the Duchess of Westford was gone. Beatrice, the vicar's daughter, stared back. Her jaw was rigid, her collarbones sharp, her dark eyes entirely devoid of warmth. I looked like a woman preparing for war. I walked down to the morning room at 8 o'clock. Lucian was already there, buried behind the Times. The silver tea service, their tea service, gleamed on the sideboard. I did not go to it. I sat at my end of the table and rang the small silver bell. When the footman appeared, I did not look at Lucian. "Thomas, I will take black coffee this morning, and please remove this tea service. Have it polished and placed in the storage vaults. Bring the plain ceramic set from the country estate downstairs." The rustle of the newspaper stopped. The silence in the room suddenly grew jagged. Thomas swallowed hard, his eyes darting between us. "Right away, Your Grace." Lucian lowered the paper. His pale gray eyes swept over me, taking in the severe hair, the lack of scent, the crimson wool that slashed violently against the muted tones of the room. A deep, confused furrow appeared between his brows. "You look different," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation. "I am merely dressing for myself this morning," I replied, meeting his gaze evenly. "The red is—" He frowned, struggling to articulate the sudden disruption of his controlled environment. "It is very loud, Beatrice." "Yes, it is." He stared at me, waiting for me to yield, to apologize, to scurry upstairs and change into a soothing lavender. I held his gaze, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not blink. A muscle flickered in his jaw. He folded the newspaper with deliberate, angry precision, slapped it onto the mahogany table, and stood. He didn't finish his breakfast. He walked out of the room, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him with the finality of a gavel. The shedding of the skin had begun. Over the next fortnight, the silent battle lines were drawn in the halls of the Westford townhouse. The comfortable illusion of our marriage corroded with terrifying speed, replaced by a suffocating, hyper-aware tension. I stopped playing the Chopin. One evening, after a particularly grueling dinner spent entirely in silence, Lucian went to his armchair by the fire and closed his eyes, the silent command for his melancholic lullaby. I sat at the pianoforte, but instead of the soft, weeping notes of the nocturne, my fingers struck the keys with vicious force, launching into a rapid, aggressive Beethoven sonata. The chords thundered through the drawing room. Lucian's eyes snapped open. He gripped the armrests of his chair, staring at my back as I hammered the keys, the tempo fast, angry, and relentlessly alive. When I finished, I closed the lid with a sharp clack. "I have lost my taste for Chopin," I said to the wall. I heard him stand. I heard the sharp, angry strike of his boots against the floorboards. "You are being deliberately provoking, Beatrice. I do not know what has possessed you lately, but this sullen rebellion is entirely beneath you." I turned on the bench. He was standing in the center of the room, tall, imperious, and completely blind to his own cruelty. I am not rebelling, Lucian. I am simply existing as I am. If you find the reality of your wife unpleasant, that is a matter for your own conscience. He recoiled as if I had slapped him. For a moment, a flash of something like guilt crossed his features, but it was quickly swallowed by the cold, aristocratic pride that served as his armor. He turned on his heel and strode out of the room. He did not return that night, nor the next. He was spending his evenings elsewhere. I did not need to hire a Bow Street runner to tell me where. The scent of violet water clung to his greatcoat when he returned at dawn. The ghost had taken up permanent residence in my marriage, and she was slowly, systematically evicting me. Society is a carnivorous beast. It feeds on scandal, and it can smell a bleeding marriage from 3 streets away. We attended the opera a week later. It was a required appearance. The Prince Regent was in attendance, and absence would be noted. I wore dark green velvet. Lucian wore a suffocating silence. We sat in the Westford box, suspended above the glittering sea of the Tun. I kept my opera glasses trained strictly on the stage, watching the soprano throw herself into a tragic aria. But the real tragedy was playing out in the stalls below, and every eye in the theater was watching it. Genevieve sat in a box directly opposite ours. She wore white tonight, a stark, blinding white silk that made her look like a piece of spun glass. She was entirely alone in the box, a highly irregular and provocative choice for a widow, designed to draw maximum attention. It worked. I didn't need to look at her. I only needed to look at my husband. Lucian sat perfectly still in his velvet chair beside me, but his stillness was the tension of a drawn bowstring. He was not watching the stage. His gaze was anchored across the theater, locked onto the white silk and the golden hair. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged bursts. His hands rested on the velvet railing, the knuckles bone white. He looked like a man dying of thirst who had just been shown a glass of water he was forbidden to drink. The whispers began in the intermission. They drifted up from the stalls, carried on the warm, perfumed air. Small groups of dowagers and dandies glancing up at our box, then across at Genevieve's, smirks, tapping fans, the quiet, devastating pity of the aristocracy. The poor Duchess. He hasn't taken his eyes off the Rossi woman all night. I heard he pays the rent on her lodgings in Mayfair. The last whisper caught me like a physical blow. The rent on her lodgings. I kept my face utterly blank. I did not look at Lucian. I did not look at the gossips. I simply stared straight ahead, a statue carved in green velvet, while the foundation of my pride turned to dust. When we returned home, the tension in the carriage finally snapped. "You made a spectacle of us tonight," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. Lucian jerked, turning his head from the window. I did nothing of the sort. I sat quietly in my box. "You did not blink for 3 hours, Lucian. You stared at her like a starving dog outside a butcher's window. Half of London is laughing at you. The other half pities me." His face flushed dark in the shadows. "You forget yourself, Beatrice." "No, I have just remembered myself. That is the problem." The carriage jolted to a halt outside our townhouse. The footman opened the door. Lucian stepped out and offered me his hand. I ignored it, stepping down unassisted, and walked past him up the stairs. I did not go to my bedchamber. I went to his study. I knew where he kept the estate ledgers. I was a vicar's daughter. I knew how to manage accounts, and early in our marriage, I had taken an interest in the running of the household. Lucian had found it amusing, letting me review the butcher's bills and the laundry expenses. It was part of our practical arrangement. I lit a single candle on his heavy oak desk and opened the leather-bound ledger for the current quarter. I ran my finger down the columns of tight, neat ink, stable fees, tailor bills, wages for the Somerset staff, my allowance. Then I saw it. An entry from 4 days ago, to Mr. Harrison, solicitor. Lease of property, 14 Charles Street, Mayfair, £300, £300. It was a staggering sum, more than enough to secure a luxurious, fully staffed townhouse in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in London. My finger trembled slightly as it moved down the page. To Rundle and Bridge, jewelers, sapphire pendant, 150 pounds, a heavy sapphire pendant. I closed my eyes. The image of the necklace he had bought me during our first month of marriage rose in my mind. He had bought me a sapphire pendant because it matched her eyes. Now, he was buying the real thing for the woman to whom those eyes actually belonged. He wasn't just emotionally unfaithful. He was setting her up. He was funding her existence. He was using the money from our shared life, the estate that I managed, the resources of the marriage he had built on my quiet, dutiful back to house and adorn the woman he truly wanted. The ledger of affections was balanced, and my column was entirely empty. I heard the heavy tread of his boots in the corridor. The study door opened. Lucian stood in the threshold, his cravat untied, a glass of brandy in his hand. He froze when he saw me standing behind his desk, the open ledger illuminated by the flickering candle. His eyes dropped to the book, and the color drained from his face. "Beatrice," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low pitch. "What are you doing?" I closed the ledger. The heavy thud of the cover echoed in the quiet room. "Reviewing the cost of a ghost," I replied. He stepped fully into the room, kicking the door shut behind him with the heel of his boot. The click of the latch sounded like a musket firing in the enclosed space. "You have no right to look through my private accounts," Lucian said. The aristocratic ice was back in his voice, attempting to freeze me into submission. It was a tactic that had worked for 3 years. It did not work tonight. "I have every right," I countered, my voice infuriatingly steady. I stepped away from the desk, circling it to face him in the center of the Persian rug. "I am the Duchess of Westford. I manage the household accounts. When 300 pounds disappears to secure a lease in Mayfair for a woman who is not a member of this family, it becomes my business." He set his brandy glass down on a side table. The liquid sloshed violently, betraying the tremor in his hand. "Genevieve was destitute," he snapped, running a hand through his dark hair. The impeccable styling was ruined, leaving him looking wild and frayed. "Her father cast her out. The Count left her penniless. She had nowhere to go, Beatrice. I could hardly let a peer's daughter sleep in the gutter." "No," I agreed softly. "But you could have let her father's solicitors handle it. You could have arranged an anonymous stipend. You did not have to install her 3 streets away from your marital home." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. "And did the threat of the gutter require 150 pounds at the jeweler, Lucian? Were the sapphires strictly for her survival?" He stopped breathing. The silence in the room stretched until it threatened to snap. He looked away, his jaw working furiously. "You do not understand." "I understand perfectly." I walked toward the fireplace, staring into the cold black grate. The portrait of me, the portrait of Genevieve painted over my face, hung above it in the shadows. "I understand that 3 years ago you needed a respectable, quiet woman to patch the hole in your pride. I was convenient. I asked for very little. I was a vessel." "That is not true," he growled, taking a step toward me. "I chose you. I respected you." "You respected my utility." I spun around, my voice finally cracking, the raw, bleeding edge of my anger tearing through the polished veneer of my composure. "You respected my ability to sit quietly at the breakfast table and not demand the pieces of your heart you had already given away." He flinched, stepping back as if I had struck him. "I tried, Lucian," I said, my voice dropping back to a fierce, trembling whisper. "I tried to be what you wanted. I wore the watery blues. I wore the lavender. I drenched myself in that cloying gardenia scent. I played the sad, weeping music you wanted to hear. I let you turn me into a pantomime of a woman you couldn't have." Lucian's face was utterly stripped of defense. The proud Duke of Westford looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, feeling the earth give way beneath his boots. "Beatrice?" He reached a hand out toward me, a desperate, hesitant gesture. I stepped back out of his reach. The physical distance was absolute. "Do not touch me." The command was cold enough to freeze blood. "Do not ever touch me again and pretend you are reaching for her." His hand fell to his side. He swallowed hard, his throat working. "I never intended to hurt you." Before she returned, We were content, were we not? We had built a good life. A comfortable illusion, I corrected him. But illusions shatter when the lights come up. Genevieve is back. You do not need the understudy anymore. I walked toward the door, my velvet skirts brushing past him. He didn't move to stop me. He seemed paralyzed by the sheer, unvarnished truth of what I was saying. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice hollow, echoing in the quiet study. I paused at the door, turning back to look at him one last time. He looked smaller somehow. Stripped of his secrets, stripped of his control, he was just a man caught between a destructive obsession and a shattered reality. "I am saying that the transaction is over," I said evenly. "You have bought your mistress a house. You may go and live in it with her. I will not seek a divorce. I have no desire to be dragged through the mud of the gossip sheets for your sins. But this marriage is finished in all but name." "Beatrice, you cannot—" "I am moving my things into the East Wing tomorrow," I interrupted, my voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "You will not enter my chambers. You will not request my presence at breakfast. When we are required to attend society functions, we will arrive in the same carriage, smile for the ton, and return to our separate lives. You may give your heart, your money, and your time to Genevieve, but you will no longer have my dignity." I opened the heavy oak door. The hallway outside was dark and quiet. "I will not let you do this," Lucian said behind me, a sudden panicked edge entering his voice. "You are my wife." I did not turn around. I gripped the brass handle of the door, feeling the cold metal ground me. "No, Lucian," I said to the empty corridor. "I was your placeholder, and my shift is done." I walked out, closing the door firmly on the Duke of Westford, and left him alone in the dark with his ghosts. The east wing of the Westford townhouse had not been occupied since Lucian's grandmother died. It was a cavernous, drafty suite of rooms facing the street, entirely cut off from the quiet, sunlit gardens at the back of the house. The wallpaper was a faded, oppressive damask. The furniture was heavy, dark, and distinctly unromantic. It was perfect. It took Martha and 2 footmen exactly 3 hours to move my belongings. I did not take the silver brushes Lucian had given me. I did not take the delicate French soaps. I took my coarse wool dresses, my books, and the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother. When the last trunk was set down at the foot of the massive 4-poster bed, Martha lingered by the door, wringing her hands in her apron. "Will you be requiring a fire, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice hushed, as if speaking too loudly might wake the dead. "Yes, Martha, a large one, and please inform the kitchen that I will take my meals in my sitting room from now on. I will not be dining downstairs." The geography of our marriage had shifted over a single afternoon. I had drawn a border, and the border was made of locked doors and absolute silence. The first week was an exercise in brutal, unyielding discipline. Every instinct I possessed, the vicar's daughter raised to smooth over conflicts, the wife trained to comfort her husband, screamed at me to go back, to knock on his study door, to apologize for my harshness. But then I would remember the ledger. I would remember the 300 pounds, the lease in Mayfair, the sapphire pendant, and the iron would return to my spine. I stopped trying to manage Lucian's world. I handed the household accounts over to the steward. I fired the French chef Lucian adored and hired a severe, terrifying Scottish cook who made excellent, unpretentious roasts. I began riding in Hyde Park at dawn, long before the fashionable hour, mounted on a massive bad-tempered bay gelding that Lucian had previously forbidden me to ride because it lacked elegance. I was no longer elegant. I was merely alive. Lucian's reaction to my withdrawal was a study in aristocratic confusion. At first, he treated my absence as a childish tantrum. He expected me to break. He left a pair of tickets to the Royal Academy on a silver salver outside my door. I instructed Thomas to return them to his study. He sent a bouquet of white roses. I had Martha burn them in the grate. By the second week, the confusion bled into something sharper. We were forced to attend a dinner party at Lord and Lady Carlisle's home. It was our first public appearance since the fracture. As dictated by our new unspoken treaty, we met in the entrance hall to board the carriage together. I descended the grand staircase wearing a gown of rich, dark forest green. The silk was heavy and unforgiving. I wore no jewelry save for a simple velvet ribbon around my throat. My hair was braided tightly to my scalp. Lucian stood by the front door, his greatcoat draped over his arm. He looked up as I approached. His eyes, usually a calm, glacial gray, were bloodshot and ringed with exhaustion. The careful, impeccable grooming that had defined him was fraying at the edges. His cravat was tied a fraction too loosely. He stared at me as I reached the bottom step. He stared at the dark green silk, the severe hair, the cold, unyielding line of my mouth. "You look—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "You look like a stranger." "I look like Beatrice," I corrected, stepping past him without brushing his arm. "Shall we go? We are late." The carriage ride was a tomb. The air between us was so thick with unspoken recriminations, I could practically taste the bitterness on my tongue. Lucian sat in his corner, his gaze fixed on the passing gas lamps. But he wasn't looking out the window. He was looking at my reflection in the glass. "Genevieve is not attending tonight," he said suddenly. His voice was defensive, preemptive. I turned my head slowly to look at him. "Do you expect a medal, Lucian? Or simply my gratitude that your mistress is indisposed?" He flinched. "She is not my mistress." "Then she is a very expensive charity case." "Beatrice, enough," he snapped, the aristocratic temper flaring. "I have provided her with a roof. That is all. I have not visited her in a week." "I do not care if you visit her every hour on the hour, or if you never see her again," I said, my voice completely devoid of inflection. "Your ledgers are your own concern now, as is your conscience." He stared at me, the anger draining from his face, replaced by a sudden jarring panic. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was not bluffing. This was not a negotiation. I'd already left him. I just hadn't vacated the premises. The dinner party was a blur of tedious conversations and overly rich food. I sat 3 seats away from Lucian. I watched him pick at his roasted pheasant. I watched him drink 3 glasses of claret in rapid succession. I watched the women at the table cast him sympathetic glances, sensing the tension, assuming the cold, severe Duchess was making the poor Duke miserable. Let them think it. I was done managing his reputation. As the evening wore on, I realized something fundamental had changed. When I looked at Lucian across the candlelight, my heart no longer stuttered. The desperate, pathetic hope that he might glance my way and smile was gone. The space in my chest where my love for him had lived was entirely burned out, leaving nothing but cold, gray ash. It was a terrible, liberating feeling. A ghost is only powerful until you turn on the lights. Genevieve had returned to London shrouded in tragedy and moonlight. She was the lost love, the stolen bride, the tragic victim of a cruel Austrian count. Lucian had bought the myth wholesale, eager to resurrect the boy he had been before she shattered his pride. But keeping a myth alive in Mayfair requires capital, and it requires maintenance. I did not seek out Genevieve's unraveling. It found me, quite by accident, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after I moved into the East Wing. I was at Madame Delacroix's Modiste in Bond Street, being fitted for a new riding habit. I stood on the small wooden pedestal in the back room, wrapped in dark gray wool, while the seamstress pinned the hem. The heavy velvet curtains separating the fitting room from the main shop were drawn, but they did not muffle sound. The bell above the shop door chimed. "Madame Delacroix," a voice demanded. It was high, reedy, and laced with a sharp, petulant irritation. I recognized the voice instantly. I stiffened, looking down at the seamstress, who kept her eyes carefully fixed on my hem. "Lady Genevieve," Madame Delacroix's voice drifted through the curtain, dripping with professional, forced politeness. "How lovely to see you. How may we assist you today?" The blue silk evening gown you sent yesterday is entirely wrong," Genevieve snapped. The ethereal, tragic whisper she had used at the Devonshire ball was entirely absent. This was the voice of a woman accustomed to demanding the world and throwing a tantrum when it was not delivered on a silver platter. "The lace at the bodice is cheap, it scratches, and the cut makes me look like a dowager." "I assure you, my lady, it is the finest Chantilly lace." "I don't care what it is unacceptable. I need a new gown for the opera on Friday, something in gold, and I want the pearls sewn directly into the skirt." "Of course, my lady, but if I may be so bold," Madame Delacroix hesitated, "there is the matter of your outstanding account, the blue silk, the 2 morning dresses, and the police from last week." "Send the bill to the Duke of Westford," Genevieve said, her tone utterly dismissive, as if she were swatting a fly. "His Grace's solicitor, Mr. Harrison, sent a messenger this morning," the modiste replied, her voice dropping an octave, tightening with nervous firmness. "He informed us that the Duke will no longer be guaranteeing your accounts, Lady Genevieve. Any new purchases must be settled in cash." The silence that followed was absolute. In the fitting room, I stopped breathing. The seamstress froze, a pin held halfway to the wool. "What did you say?" Genevieve's voice was barely a hiss. "Mr. Harrison was quite clear, my lady. The Duke has closed the line of credit." "That is impossible. That is a mistake. Lucian would never—" She faltered. The confident, demanding aristocrat vanished, replaced by a sudden, jagged panic. "Lucian loves me. He bought me a house. He bought me sapphires." "I'm only telling you what the solicitor told me, my lady." "You are lying!" The sound of fabric tearing echoed through the shop, as if Genevieve had grabbed a bolt of silk and ripped it in a rage. "He is paying my lease. He's going to leave that dull, puritanical mouse he married and set me up properly. He promised me." I closed my eyes. The words did not hurt. They were just confirmation of a disease I had already diagnosed and cut out of my body. But then, a new voice spoke. "I promised you nothing of the sort." The heavy shop door had opened without the bell chiming. The voice was low, rough, and completely devoid of warmth. It was Lucian. I stepped off the pedestal, ignoring the gasp of the seamstress, and moved toward the velvet curtain. I didn't open it. I simply stood behind the heavy fabric, listening to the destruction of my husband's fantasy. "Lucian," Genevieve gasped. The petulance vanished instantly, replaced by a desperate weeping fragility. "Lucian, thank God you are here. This horrible woman is lying to me. She claims you cut off my credit." "She is not lying," Lucian said. I could hear the heavy tread of his boots on the floorboards as he walked further into the shop. "I instructed Harrison this morning." But, why?" The tears in her voice sounded genuine now, genuine fear. "How am I to live? You know my father will not take me back. You know the Count left me with nothing. You have the house on Charles Street. The lease is paid for 6 months. You have the sapphires. You can sell them if you require funds for pearl-encrusted gowns." His voice was dead, flat and exhausted. "Sell them? But you gave them to me. They match my eyes." She sounded like a panicked child. "Yes, they do." Lucian sighed, a long, ragged sound that carried the weight of a decade of foolishness. "Genevieve, why did you come back to London?" "For you," she cried. "I realized my mistake. I realized I never stopped loving you." "Did you?" The cynicism in his voice mirrored my own. It was a dark, ugly mirror. "Or did the Count's fortune run dry before his heart gave out? Did you realize you were aging, penniless, and needed a secure port to dock your sinking ship? How can you say that to me, after everything we meant to each other?" "Because I have finally opened my eyes," Lucian said quietly. "I looked at you, Genevieve, truly looked at you. And I realized I have spent the last 5 years mourning a phantom. The woman I loved died the night she climbed into a carriage with an Austrian count. The woman standing in front of me is merely a stranger wearing her face, demanding I pay her debts. Lucian, please, you are just angry about Beatrice. You are letting that cold, unfeeling woman turn you against me. Do not speak her name." The sudden, violent command cracked through the shop like a whip. It made me flinch behind the curtain. "Do not ever speak my wife's name with that mouth. Beatrice is worth 10 of you. She built a life with me. She managed my home. She stayed. You fled the moment a heavier purse was dangled in front of you. She was a replacement, Genevieve shrieked, all pretense of tragedy gone, leaving only vicious, cornered malice. You dressed her like me. You made her wear my colors. Everyone in society knows it. She knows it. You don't love her. You just wanted a doll to play with until I came back. The silence that followed was heavy and thick, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. You are right, Lucian said. His voice was a hollow, ruined rasp. I did. It is the greatest shame of my life, and I have broken the only real true thing I ever had because I was too blinded by my own wounded pride to see it. I heard him turn on his heel. Lucienne, wait! Where are you going? You cannot leave me like this. I am leaving you exactly as you left me, Genevieve, he said. The shop door opened. The bell chimed. Alone. The door clicked shut. Genevieve began to sob, high, ugly, frantic sounds. I stood in the dark behind the velvet curtain, my hands clenched at my sides, feeling absolutely nothing at all. It took him 3 days to come to the East Wing. It was a Friday evening. Outside, the London rain was coming down in sheets, beating a relentless tattoo against the leaded windows of my sitting room. I was sitting in a winged armchair by the fire, reading a treatise on agricultural reform, a subject I genuinely enjoyed, completely devoid of poetry or romance. When the knock came, it was not the polite, deferential tap of a servant. It was heavy, hesitant. Come in, I said, not looking up from the page. The heavy oak door creaked open. Lucian stood in the threshold. He looked terrible. The arrogant, untouchable Duke of Westford was gone. In his place was a man who looked as though he had not slept in a week. He wore no cravat. His waistcoat was unbuttoned. He smelled faintly of rain and brandy, but he was not drunk. He was devastatingly sober. He didn't cross the threshold immediately. He stood there, looking at me. I was wearing my crimson wool gown. My hair was tied back severely. The firelight caught the sharp angles of my collarbones. I did not offer him a seat. I did not soften my gaze. May I come in? He asked, his voice rough, scraping against the silence of the room. It is your house, Lucian. You may walk where you please. He winced at the coldness of the permission, but he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He walked slowly toward the fire, stopping a few feet from my chair. He looked at the agricultural book in my lap, at the plain ceramic teacup on the side table, at the complete lack of lavender or gardenias in the room. I terminated the lease on Charles Street, he said quietly. I know. I saw the ledger this morning. I turned a page in my book. She is leaving for Paris on Tuesday. Her father finally agreed to send her a small allowance, provided she remains on the continent. A practical solution for a persistent problem, I murmured, my eyes scanning a paragraph about crop rotation. I hope the journey is smooth. Beatrice, put the book down. Please. The desperation in his voice was raw, bleeding out onto the Persian rug between us. I marked my page with a ribbon, closed the book, and set it on the table. I folded my hands in my lap and looked up at him. I gave him my full, undivided, unsoftened attention. I was at the Modiste on Tuesday, I said evenly. I heard everything. Lucian froze. The color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen white. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just been led to the gallows, only to find the rope was already around his neck. You heard, he choked out, every word. Your defense of my character was very noble, Lucian. A bit late, perhaps, but noble nonetheless. He dropped to his knees. It was a sudden, violent collapse of pride. The Duke of Westford, a man who bowed to no one but the king, sank onto the floorboards in front of my chair. He didn't try to touch me. He just knelt there, his head bowed, his broad shoulders shaking slightly. I am a fool, he whispered to the floor. I am a blind, arrogant, unforgivable fool. Yes, I agreed quietly. You are. He looked up at me, his gray eyes shining with unshed tears. I built a shrine to a memory, Beatrice. I let it poison my mind. When she returned, I thought I could reclaim the man I was before she left. But the man I was back then was a child. He didn't know what it meant to have a true partner. He didn't know the value of quiet, steady loyalty Loyalty is not a commodity to be bought and sold, Lucian. You treated my loyalty as a given, while you spent your emotional capital on a ghost. I see that now. God help me, I see it. He reached out, his hand trembling, stopping an inch from the hem of my crimson dress. When I saw her, when I truly saw what she was, all I could think of was you. All I wanted was to come home, to the life we built. We did not build a life, I corrected him, my voice devoid of anger, which seemed to terrify him more than rage ever could. You built a stage set. I was merely the actress you hired to walk the boards. No, Beatrice, the love I felt for you. Do not insult my intelligence by calling it love. The sudden snap in my voice made him jerk backward. I leaned forward in my chair, staring down at him, letting the full, unvarnished weight of my cynicism crush his romantic apologies. You loved how easy I made your life. You loved that I required no effort. You loved that you could dress me up in her colors and play pretend. But you did not love me. You did not even know me. Then let me know you now. He pressed his hands to the floor, leaning towards me, his face an agonizing portrait of regret. Let me learn you, the real you. Keep the crimson dresses, keep the terrible, angry music, burn every lavender gown in the house. I don't care. I just want my wife back. I looked at him. I saw the absolute sincerity in his eyes. He meant it. The illusion of Genevieve was dead and buried, and he was finally, truly looking at Beatrice. 3 years ago, this declaration would have brought me to my knees. I would have wept. I would have forgiven him instantly. But I was no longer the quiet vicar's daughter desperate for a scrap of affection. I was a woman who had survived the destruction of her own illusions. You broke the vessel, Lucian, I said softly, leaning back in my chair. I can mend it, he pleaded. I swear to you on my life, I will spend every day making amends. I will earn your trust back. I will court you properly. Just do not leave me in this empty house. I looked at the fire dancing in the grate. I thought of the comfortable illusion of the past 3 years. I thought of the agonizing pain of the last 3 weeks. I'm leaving for the Somerset estate tomorrow morning, I said. Lucian let out a ragged breath, closing his eyes as if bracing for a physical blow. I see. You are leaving me. I am going to the country, I clarified, my tone brisk, factual. I need fresh air. I need to ride that bad-tempered bay gelding across the fields. I need to be in a house that does not smell of French perfume and dead memories. He opened his eyes, a tiny, fragile spark of hope igniting in the gray depths. Are you ever coming back? I stood up. Lucian scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly as he towered over me, but he did not reach for me. He kept his hands strictly at his sides. I do not know, I said honestly. I am going to Somerset to discover who I am when I am not trying to be the perfect duchess or the perfect understudy. If, at the end of the summer, I find that I have a desire to return to London, and if you have proven that you are capable of living in reality rather than a tragic fantasy, then perhaps we will sit down at a table and discuss a new arrangement. An arrangement? He repeated, swallowing hard. Yes. A marriage built on absolute truth, no ghosts, no costumes, no comfortable silence. If I come back, Lucian, it will be loud, it will be demanding, and it will be entirely on my terms. He looked at me, the woman in the severe hair and the blood-red dress. He saw the iron spine, the cynical eyes, the complete lack of romantic delusion. He saw the real Beatrice. And for the first time in our entire acquaintance, he looked at me with absolute, profound reverence. I will wait, he said, his voice dropping to a solemn vow. If it takes the whole summer or a whole year or the rest of my life, I will be here, living in reality, waiting for you. I did not smile. I did not offer him a comforting touch. I simply nodded. We shall see, I said. I walked past him, leaving the Duke of Westford standing alone in my sitting room. Tomorrow I would leave for the country. I would breathe clean air. I would shed the final remnants of the ghost that had haunted my life. The comfortable illusion was dead. But as I walked down the long, drafty corridor of the East Wing, feeling the heavy crimson wool swish against my ankles, I realized something. The ashes of a burned-down fantasy make excellent soil for something real to grow. If you love this story of shattered illusions and finding true self-worth, hit that like button. Beatrice's journey from a quiet understudy to a fiercely independent woman is a reminder that we should never shrink ourselves to fit into someone else's ghosts. Do you think Lucian deserves a second chance, or should Beatrice stay in the country forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves grounded, emotional, historical drama, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply human stories. See you next time!